I was driving back from my parents' house one night, a stretch of road I knew well. It's a rural highway, mostly surrounded by trees, and there's rarely much traffic. Just me and the road. It was close to midnight, and I had at least another hour to go. The moon was full, casting a dim light over everything, but the road was pitch black except for my headlights. About halfway through my drive, I saw something strange in the distance, an odd shape on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, it looked wrong. The shape was tall, too tall to be an animal. My foot instinctively eased off the gas as my car approached. It was a woman, standing there at the edge of the road. She wore a thin, white nightgown that clung to her body, and her hair hung down wet and stringy. I didn't slow down much, just enough to pass without stopping. There was no way I was going to stop. Her back was to me, but as I passed, I felt her turn towards the car. I didn't look directly at her, but in my peripheral vision, I saw her face, pale, sunken eyes, like she hadn't slept in weeks. I kept driving, heart pounding. I checked my rearview mirror after I'd gone a bit further. The road behind me was empty, no sign of her. But then, just before I looked away, I saw something else. She was sitting in my back seat. I swerved off the road, nearly crashing into a tree. My heart was racing, but when I turned around, the back seat was empty. Completely empty. I took a few deep breaths, trying to convince myself that I was just seeing things, but my hands were trembling. I started driving again, slower this time, eyes flickering between the road and my rearview mirror. I didn't see her again that night, but ever since that drive, I've had this lingering feeling, like something is just out of sight, watching me. Every time I glance at my rearview mirror, I'm scared I'll see her again. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think I hear her breathing just behind me. It was a few years ago when I took a job as a night security guard at an abandoned hospital just outside of town. The place had been shut down for nearly a decade after a series of budget cuts. It was eerie, sure, but the pay was decent, and I figured I could handle a few hours of solitude every night. My job was simple: walk the halls, make sure no one had broken in, and check the cameras. Easy enough. The first few nights were uneventful, but the place had a weird vibe. Hospitals are strange in the daytime, but at night, the silence was heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The kind of silence where every small sound feels magnified. A creak, a distant clatter. Things you'd brush off in the daytime felt wrong here. I started noticing strange things pretty early on. First, it was the temperature. One hallway in particular always felt freezing, no matter the time of year. It wasn't near any windows or vents, and the thermostat never showed anything out of the ordinary. But the chill in the air was unmistakable, and every time I walked down it, I felt like someone was right behind me. Then there was the fourth floor. The elevators had long been out of service, so I always took the stairs, but I avoided that floor as much as possible. There was something about it, something unsettling. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I would catch glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye, shadows that shouldn't be there, and one night while I was doing my rounds, I thought I heard a door creak open. I stopped in the stairwell, listening. It was faint but distinct, a door slowly opening and then closing with a soft thud. I knew there wasn't anyone else in the building. I checked. I always checked. But the sound wasn't my imagination. Against my better judgment, I climbed the last flight of stairs to the fourth floor. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I moved slowly down the corridor. It was quiet now, but I couldn't shake that feeling that I wasn't alone. As I approached one of the patients' rooms, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Just a brief glimpse, a figure standing in the doorway, but when I turned, there was no one there. I stepped into the room, half expecting to find someone hiding, but it was empty. The bed was still there, old and rusted, but no signs of life. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, a door creaking open, but this time it was behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, and saw the door to the room across the hall slowly closing. There was no breeze, no draft, nothing that could have caused it. My throat tightened, and a cold sweat ran down my spine. I should have left then, but something made me walk over to that door. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that it was nothing. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, but I could make out the bed, the old medical equipment, and in the far corner, someone sitting in the chair. At first I thought it was a mannequin. Hospitals sometimes kept them for training purposes, but as I shined my flashlight on it, I realized it wasn't plastic. It was a person sitting perfectly still. Her back was to me, head slightly tilted down, long black hair hanging loosely around her face. "Hello?" I called out, but there was no response. My heart was racing now, my gut screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't move. It felt like my feet were glued to the floor. I took a step closer, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. The figure didn't move. I was close enough now that I could see the frail outline of her body, shoulders hunched over. There was something wrong with her skin. It was pale, almost translucent, and as I got closer, I saw her fingers. They were long, too long, bony and stretched out unnaturally, resting on her lap. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I forced the words out, my throat dry, but still she didn't move. I took one more step, and that's when I heard it. A soft, raspy breathing. But it wasn't coming from the figure in the chair. It was coming from directly behind me. I froze, every hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Slowly, painfully, I turned around expecting to see something horrible, but there was nothing. Just the empty hallway behind me. But the breathing, it continued, loud and labored, as if someone was standing inches away. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. I spun around, shining my flashlight at the figure in the chair, but she was gone. The chair was empty, the room completely still. I ran out of that room and didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air. I never went back to that hospital after that night. I quit the next day without explanation. But sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can still hear that raspy breathing coming from just behind me. I've always been a light sleeper. The slightest noise wakes me up, so when I moved into my new apartment, I made sure to choose a unit on the top floor, far away from the street. It was a quiet building, no kids, no loud neighbors, exactly what I needed. The first few weeks were peaceful. I'd go to bed around midnight, and aside from the usual creaks of an old building, everything was silent. That was until I started hearing it. It was subtle at first, a soft scraping sound, like something dragging across the floor coming from above me. The first time I heard it, I thought maybe someone was moving furniture or cleaning late at night. It was odd, but I brushed it off, except the sound kept happening. Always around 3 a.m., always the same scraping noise, like something heavy being pulled across the ceiling. One night, I had enough. I knew for a fact that I was on the top floor. There was no apartment above mine, just the roof. So what was making that noise? Curiosity turned into dread as I lay there, listening to the faint rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. I mentioned it to the building manager the next day. He gave me a strange look when I told him about the noise. "There's no one up there, just the attic. It's been sealed off for years. Nothing but old pipes and insulation," he said. But I knew what I heard. I could feel the vibrations in the walls, the sound too deliberate to be just pipes settling. That night, I stayed awake, determined to figure out what was happening. As usual, around 3 a.m., the scraping started. This time, I got out of bed, I grabbed a flashlight and went to the hallway, following the sound. There was a small, locked door at the end of the hall that led to the attic. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but now it seemed to beckon me. The scraping noise was louder out here, like it was coming from directly behind that door. I tried the handle. It was locked, as expected. But the noise continued, more frantic now, like whatever was behind the door knew I was there. My heart was racing, but I couldn't stop myself. I knocked on the door. Silence. For a moment, everything was still. No sound, no movement, just the quiet hum of the hallway light. Then suddenly there was a loud thud from behind the door, followed by a dragging sound, something heavy moving across the floor on the other side. I took a step back, my skin crawling. The next day, I demanded that the building manager let me into the attic. I needed to know what was going on. He hesitated at first, muttering about old buildings and how sometimes they just make noise. But I insisted. Reluctantly, he unlocked the door and pushed it open. The attic was dusty and cold, filled with old pipes and insulation, just like he said. But something was off. In the far corner of the attic, there was a small square hole cut into the floor, just large enough for someone to crawl through. The edges were worn, as if it had been used frequently. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the hole. The manager looked pale. That wasn't here before." We walked over to it, shining the flashlight down. It led to a narrow crawl space between the ceiling of my apartment and the floor of the attic. The space was barely big enough to move through, but there were clear drag marks in the dust leading back and forth over the ceiling of my unit. Someone had been in there. I felt sick. The scraping noises, the thuds, it wasn't pipes or insulation. Someone had been crawling above me, watching, listening. We called the police immediately. They searched the attic and the crawl space, but didn't find anyone. Whoever it was had disappeared. For a while, I couldn't sleep, too afraid that the noises would start again. But a few nights later, I heard something else. Not a scrape, not a thud, just a soft whisper. Coming from directly above my bed. And then I realized the hole in the attic wasn't the only one. There was another, hidden in the ceiling of my bedroom. I grew up in a small, quiet town where nothing much ever happened. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the only excitement comes from local gossip or the occasional community event. My best friend, Tyler, and I spent most of our childhood exploring the woods that bordered the town. We knew every path, every hidden stream, and every old, forgotten structure. But there was one place we always avoided, the old house deep in the forest. It had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. People said it was cursed, that strange things happened there. Stories circulated about people who wandered too close and never came back, or came back different, silent, withdrawn, like they had seen something they couldn't explain. We never believed the stories, of course. It was just a crumbling old house, nothing more. But we stayed away anyway. Maybe out of respect for the legends, or maybe because something about it just didn't feel right. One summer, when we were about 16, Tyler and I were feeling particularly adventurous. Bored with our usual haunts, we dared each other to finally check out the old house. It felt childish to still be scared of it, so we packed a few snacks, grabbed our flashlights, and headed out just before sunset. The hike to the house took about an hour. The deeper we got into the woods, the more uneasy I felt. The trees seemed denser here, and the usual sounds of the forest, birds, insect, the wind, felt muted. By the time we reached the clearing where the house stood, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the yard. The house was worse than I had imagined. The roof sagged, windows were broken, and the front door hung off its hinges. The whole place had an oppressive air, like it didn't want us there. Tyler laughed nervously, trying to shake off the tension, and made his way up the steps. They creaked under his weight, but he pushed open the door and stepped inside. I hesitated for a moment before following him. The inside of the house was even more unsettling. It was cold, unnaturally so for a summer evening, and everything was coated in a thick layer of dust. Old furniture lay broken and scattered, and the wallpaper had peeled off in long, curling strips. There was a faint smell in the air, something rotten, though I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Tyler called me over to look at something in the living room. On the wall, someone had scratched strange symbols into the plaster, crude markings that didn't look like anything I recognized. They trailed all the way up the staircase, disappearing into the darkness of the second floor. "I bet good stuff's up there," Tyler said, grinning, but his voice was shaky. He started up the stairs without waiting for me. I reluctantly followed. The upstairs was worse. The walls felt like they were closing in, the ceiling sagging and dangerously low in some spots. As we walked down the hall, I noticed more of those strange symbols etched into the walls, deeper now, like someone had carved them with force. The air was heavy, and the smell was stronger up here. We reached the last door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. Tyler, being braver or stupider than me, pushed it open. Inside was what looked like an old bedroom. The bed frame was rusted, and the mattress was stained and rotting. But what caught my attention was the mirror on the wall. It was the only thing in the house that wasn't covered in dust. In fact, it looked brand new, the glass gleaming in the dim light from our flashlights. Tyler stepped closer, curious, and reached out to touch it. "Don't," I said, but he ignored me. The moment his fingers brushed the surface of the mirror, the air in the room shifted. The temperature dropped even more, and I swear I heard a faint whisper, like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but the hall was empty. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tyler didn't answer. He was staring at the mirror, his hand still pressed against it, his face pale and blank. I grabbed his shoulder and shook him. "Tyler!" He snapped out of it, blinking rapidly and jerking his hand away from the mirror. I thought I saw something," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. "Something in the glass." "We should go," I said, a growing sense of dread gnawing at my stomach. "Now." Tyler nodded, and we headed back down the stairs, moving quickly, no longer trying to play it cool. As we stepped outside, the last sliver of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, plunging the forest into darkness. We made our way back in silence, both of us too spooked to talk. But after a few minutes, I realized something was off. The woods around us felt different. The path seemed narrower, the trees taller, looming over us like they were closing in. I looked behind us, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing just inside the tree line, watching us. I blinked and it was gone. We picked up the pace, practically running through the forest. By the time we reached the edge of the woods and saw the lights of the town, I was gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Tyler didn't say much after that. He grew distant, quiet. Over the next few weeks, I hardly saw him. When I did, he looked worse and worse, pale, with dark circles in his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He refused to talk about what happened at that house. One night I got a call from his mom. Tyler had gone missing. They found his car at the edge of the woods, near the trailhead that led to the old house. I knew where he had gone, but I couldn't bring myself to go looking for him. They never found him. But sometimes when I walk by those woods, I swear I can hear footsteps behind me, and when I look into the dark spaces between the trees, I can see a figure standing there, watching. It started with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, is this Sarah? I'm outside." I stared at my phone, confused. I'm not Sarah, and I hadn't been expecting anyone. I figured it was just a wrong number, so I replied, "Sorry, wrong person." A minute later, another text buzzed through. "Are you sure? I'm pretty sure this is the right house." I glanced out my window. The street was empty, just the usual row of parked cars and the dim glow of streetlights. I lived in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing ever happened here. I ignored the text and went back to watching TV. A few minutes passed and my phone vibrated again. "I'm looking right at your house." That one made me sit up straight. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't want to respond, but curiosity got the better of me. I typed, "What house are you looking at?" The reply came almost instantly. "Your house, with the blue door." I froze. My front door was blue. For a second, I considered calling the police, but then I reasoned with myself. It was probably someone playing a prank, or maybe they Googled my address somehow. I wasn't about to get worked up over a text message. Still, I got up and locked all the doors, double-checking the windows before settling back on the couch. My phone buzzed again, and I almost didn't want to look, but I did. "Why did you lock the door?" My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, scanning the room, as if expecting to see someone peering through the window. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting, my fingers trembling as they hovered over my phone. Then, just as I was about to dial the police, another message came through. "I'm coming in." That's when I heard it. a soft knock at the front door. I dropped my phone, the sound echoing in the silent room. My throat went dry. My mind was racing, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Then, the doorknob started to turn. It was slow, deliberate, like whoever was on the other side was toying with me. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline flooding my veins. I grabbed a kitchen knife, the closest thing to a weapon I could think of, and crept towards the door. I was shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The door handle stopped moving, but then a soft, scraping sound started, like someone was dragging their nails down the wood. It was methodically steady. I backed away, my legs like jelly, retreating to the farthest corner of the room. My phone buzzed again, and I almost screamed. I glanced at the screen. Don't run. I felt cold, like I was standing in front of an open freezer. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and it was suddenly hard to breathe. My hand clenched tighter around the knife. I had no idea what I would do. I didn't want to go to the door, but staying in the house didn't feel safe either. The scraping sound stopped, and for a minute, everything was silent. Too silent. Then the back door rattled. I spun around, my pulse racing. There's no way anyone could have gotten back there so fast. I hadn't heard footsteps, but the door was shaking, harder now, as if someone was pounding on it with their fists. I ran towards the kitchen, ready to defend myself, when I heard a loud crash from the front of the house, glass shattering. I turned just in time to see the window beside my front door explode inward. I screamed, backing up as shards of glass scattered across the floor. My phone buzzed. Gotcha. Without thinking, I ran. I bolted through the house, not caring about the noise I was making, fumbling with the back door lock. My hands were slick with sweat, my vision tunneling as panic overtook me. I got the door open and stumbled out into the yard. The night was still. Too still. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I made it to the street, frantically looking for any sign of someone, but the road was empty. No cars, no footsteps, nothing. I looked back at my house. The front window was broken, but no one was there. Just the gaping hole, jagged glass reflecting the streetlights. My phone buzzed again. I can see you. I dropped it. I didn't care where the message came from anymore. I just ran. I didn't stop running until I reached a neighbor's house. I banged on their door, terrified and breathless, until they let me in. When the police arrived, they didn't find anyone. No signs of a forced entry beyond the broken window. No footprints, no evidence that anyone had been in the house at all. The texts, they were traced to a burner phone, untraceable. No one ever found out who sent them. I moved out of that house the next day, but sometimes even now when I check my phone late at night, I wonder if I'll see that message again. I'm outside. It was the kind of night where everything felt wrong. You know the feeling, you can't explain it, but the air seems thicker, like the world's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That's how it felt when I got home from my late shift. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the outside of the city. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, or at least it usually was. That night, though, something was off. It started as soon as I unlocked the door. As I stepped inside, I noticed that familiar smell. My place always had a faint scent of cleaning supplies and old wood. But there was something else mixed in. Something metallic, like blood almost. I chalked it up to my imagination, maybe the stress of a long day, and shut the door behind me. I threw my keys on the counter and kicked off my shoes, heading for the kitchen to grab something to eat. But as I walked through the living room, I stopped. All the picture frames on the wall were crooked, every single one of them. I stared at them for a moment, heart skipping a beat. I hadn't touched them. I know I hadn't. The frames had been perfectly straight when I left for work this morning. I told myself it must have been the vibrations from traffic outside, or maybe I bumped into the wall without realizing it. I straightened the frames, one by one, and tried to shake off the weird feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. But it didn't go away. I moved into the kitchen, opening the fridge, and started making a sandwich. As I stood there, I heard it. a soft creak from the hallway, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. I froze. I live alone. I slowly put the knife down on the counter, my pulse quickening, my eyes darting towards the hallway. But there was no one there, just the empty corridor leading to my bedroom. I tried to calm myself down, rationalize it. Old buildings make noises, pipes, settling wood, it could be anything. But then I heard it again, a faint shuffle, closer this time. It sounded like it was coming from my bedroom. I grabbed the knife off the counter, my grip tightening around the handle. I wasn't about to stand there and let my imagination get the best of me. If someone was in my apartment, I was going to find out. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached the doorway to my bedroom, I paused, listening. The room was dark, but I could just make out the shape of the bed, the dresser, and the closet door, which was slightly open. I never leave the closet door open. I took a deep breath and stepped inside the room, moving towards the closet. My knuckles were white from gripping the knife so tightly. The closer I got to the door, the more I felt that metallic scent in the air. Stronger this time. I reached out with my free hand and yanked the closet door open. Nothing. Just clothes hanging there, motionless. I let out a shaky breath and lowered the knife, feeling ridiculous. I was scaring myself for no reason. There was no one here. Then I heard it again. The creak. But this time it wasn't from the hallway. It was from under the bed. I backed up, my breath catching in my throat. The silence in the room was suffocating, thick with the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl. I stared at the edge of the bed, my mind racing. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to kneel down, slowly lowering my head to look underneath. At first, all I could see was darkness. The space under the bed was too shadowy to make out much. But then I saw it. A face. Someone was under my bed. I jerked back, scrambling to my feet, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely think. My first instinct was to run, but as I bolted for the door, I heard a voice, low, raspy, coming from beneath the bed. "Don't leave." I stopped, frozen in place, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It was almost pleading. "Please, don't leave. Not yet." I stood there, trembling, unable to move. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. I didn't know whether to scream, run, or fight, but something about the voice stopped me. It was like it wasn't asking me to not leave. It was begging. I swallowed hard, gripping the knife in my hand like a lifeline. I turned back towards the bed, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The voice spoke again, quieter this time, as if it was fading. "Check the bathroom." The bathroom? Why? What was this, some kind of sick game? I didn't know what to do, but against every instinct screaming inside of me, I moved toward the bathroom door. My hand shook as I reached for the knob, and I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my spine. I pushed the door open. The bathroom light was already on, and what I saw inside made my blood turn to ice. It was me, lying in the bathtub, motionless, pale, eyes wide open in a glassy stare. I staggered back, dropping the knife. The world spun, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. That was me, lying there, dead. It couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of twisted hallucination, a nightmare. I heard the voice again, but this time it was right behind me, so close I could feel the breath on my neck. "Now do you understand?" I turned around, but there was no one there, just the empty room.